That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Wolfman, the fourth film directed by Leigh Whannell, which Universal Pictures is releasing January 17th, 2025.
What else has Leigh Whannell directed?
Well, you know him as a screenwriter first, who wrote Saw and Insidious for James Wan. His directorial debut was his Insidious Chapter 3. He also directed Upgrade, which you haven't seen, is really worth a watch, with Logan Marshall Green. And also, I know you were a fan of another reboot of his, The Invisible Man, starring Elizabeth Moss in 2020.
Yes. What is Wolfman about? A family at a remote farmhouse is attacked by an unseen animal, but as the night stretches on, the father begins to transform into something unrecognizable. What is your pull quote?
Whannell gets back to basics while also subtly tweaking lycanthropy lore in his reboot of The Wolfman, mixing attachment theory and metaphors in a parable about the sometimes unavoidable fate of becoming the thing you hate.
Very good. Mine, Wolfman delivers as a creature feature that packs an emotional punch. I enjoyed this movie.
Yes.
So we reviewed a film called Werewolves with Frank Grillo. And I agreed to watch that movie because I thought it was this film. So I was looking forward to watching Wolfman.
There is something similar and somewhat cliched that is utilized in both films,
But the story is very simple. Christopher Abbott plays a guy named Blake who lives in the big city with his wife, Julia Garner.
Charlotte.
And their daughter,
Ginger, played by Matilda Firth, which I'm wondering if that's a reference to Ginger Snaps, another very lively and notable werewolf film.
Oh, yeah. And Ginger's probably, what, like 9?
Yeah.
Maybe? She's a kid. Okay, so we find out that Christopher Abbott's dad has recently been declared deceased. He went missing, and so the authorities have said he's deceased. So he now needs to go back home to Oregon to take care of his father's affairs, which amounts to the house he grew up in, like going back there to see what he's supposed to do with it. And we understand that he and his wife are having some marital issues. They're not exactly happy. They're both writers, but Julia Garner's character is the breadwinner.
She's the journalist.
While Christopher Abbott is the stay-at-home dad. So they drive out to Oregon, or they go to Oregon, and we see them pull up to the house in a U-Haul, and immediately things go left because...
Well, they don't even technically pull up to the house.
No, they don't. The film opens 30 years prior, and we're told back in 1995 a hiker went missing in the area where Blake grew up, and the locals believe that that person was perhaps basically turned into a werewolf.
Called Hill's fever, or as we're told, the indigenous population called it, the face of the wolf.
So when Blake and his family come back in modern day, he's a little turned around because cell phones don't work, so his GPS is not working, and he hasn't been home in decades. And he bumps into a guy who knows him. They grew up together.
Played by Benedict Hardie, who Leigh Whannell likes to cast.
Oh, I didn't recognize him, but his character's name's Derek. And Derek says like, oh, well, I'm sure you remember, but you're not supposed to be out at night. And we had already seen in the opening of the film 30 years prior that Blake's dad, who we can get to their relationship, but we see them getting attacked by some sort of creature that we can presume was a werewolf. So we already know that this creature is probably that. But as Derek is showing Blake how to find his dad's house, night falls, and they get into a crash. And Christopher Abbott is scratched by the werewolf. So the bulk of the movie is Christopher Abbott's character turning into a werewolf. But he has a very deep connection with his daughter because he's basically the one raising her. So it's pretty predictable that his character is turning into a werewolf, but he's going to protect his family from the werewolf who attacked him. And the gag is that when he finally does come face to face with that werewolf and kill it, we find out that that werewolf who was attacking him and who infected him is his father.
Which I clocked.
You clocked it, I didn't, so it was a surprise.
I clocked it because of the bone structure of the actor, Sam Jaeger.
Oh, sure. But now that the other werewolf is dead, we still have to contend with Christopher Abbott, who is not safe to be around. And another sort of character trait of the daughter is that she and her dad do this thing where she's supposed to be a mind reader.
It's almost like a calming down mechanism.
I thought it was very sweet. But at the very end, when Julia Garner has an opportunity to kill Christopher Abbott, it's the daughter who says, "Mommy, he wants this to end." So she kills him, and then they walk off into the distance.
The dewy dawn.
The end. Yeah, I got emotional quite a few times. I had been drinking, so I don't know if that aided it. But
I didn't get emotional, but I think it's missing it's missing like a touch or two of moments where I think that could have driven that element home to me.
Well, let's start with what we liked. So I like Julia Garner.
I do too.
And she's effective in this.
And this is much better than Apartment 7A, which is a nod to Rosemary's Baby. Because, I don't know if you're familiar with Lon Chaney Jr. starring in the 1941 version of The Wolfman.
No.
Or I know you have seen that terrible Benicio del Toro version with the directed by Joe Johnston, which I didn't like. But all of this is at the nitty gritty going back to a man returning to his ancestral home and finding kind of this curse there. So that element is intact.
I like Christopher Abbott.
I do too.
And I think he's effective in this. I mean, the film really is just about this family of three. I liked the actor playing the daughter. I thought she was really sweet. I like the look of the film. There are some flourishes, specifically what I wrote down as a wolf vision.
I really liked that too, because it's this trans-special experience is happening and how the world is changing for him. Just as, our perception is how he's changing, but I like that we're flashing into how he is kind of in between two places.
And I thought those were the moments that made me emotional because we can see and hear that as he's transitioning to being a werewolf, he cannot understand his wife and daughter. But his love for his daughter is so strong that like instinctually he knows that he needs to protect her. And I thought that was very effective.
I thought so too, but that is also a trope of werewolf movies, like Jenny Agutter facing off with David Naughton's werewolf in the end of An American Werewolf in London, for instance, where there's that pause where he recognizes this woman that he loves.
Yes,
but also, and I know that Leigh Whannell had spoken, I think, about being influenced by Cronenberg's version of The Fly. I think that you see that as well.
I like the cinematography.
Stefan Duscio, and again, the composer Benjamin Wallfish. These are all people that have worked with Whannell before. They're all Invisible Man, the crew of that.
And the sound editing. What I mean, I really did like this movie. I think we're probably, I don't have many complaints, but I agree it's very simple.
Very straightforward, and nothing wrong with that.
No.
But I like the juxtaposition of the opening where you can see this father that has a love for his child, but it comes
back in 1995.
But it comes across in all the wrong ways, like like out of terror almost, like that I have to protect my child. And they sense this creature in the woods and they hide in a deer stand, and we get the exact same moment but with mother and daughter instead of father and son.
Yeah, the opening was very effective, although I did think that because we see Blake back in 1995 as like a 10-year-old, his dad sort of teaching him survival skills, and I was expecting that to come back into play.
Well, I think it does. I think that the juxtaposition of father and son versus mother and daughter is how we teach these survival skills to children, and maybe the way of the past, the way of the heteropatriarchy, maybe is not the way, the brute force is not the way that survival should be taught.
Well, I mean specifically like how the dad was showing him like, don't eat these mushrooms, this is how you hunt. I was expecting that to be a component of when they go back, and it isn't. But
reactionary and no communication between child and adult, whereas this daughter has to tell the mother, she kills the father based on what the kid says. So this communication that is possible between a mother and daughter that maybe wasn't possible between a father and son.
But I thought the opening was very effective. Before we go to present day, I thought the only part I didn't really like was the character of Derek, the guy who recognized Blake from childhood, who was in that deer stand.
Well, he's needed for maybe a little bit of segue exposition.
I thought the performance and the characterization was a little corny because when Blake and his wife and daughter show up in the U-Haul, he goes to the gate of what he thinks is his dad's house. Mm-hmm. And it's Julia Garner's character who says, oh my gosh, I think there's someone over there. And as the audience, we see there's a figure in the deer stand, which is creepy. Mm-hmm. And then that figure comes down and it's Derek. And he recognizes Blake and says, yeah, I'm so-and-so's son. I remember you when we were kids. And Blake's like, oh yeah, what's up? I'm trying to find my dad's house. Well, this is not it. And it's a little awkward.
You know what I liked about that scene, though, not apart from what you're going to continue to say about that character, is that it immediately displaces Julia Garner. Like, as we return to the home front, she has to move to the back seat, which felt very...
Yeah, I think that is effective.
Meaningful.
Yes. So up until what I'm saying, I think it does work well. But then when Blake says, well, he's going to get in the car to show us where to go, and Julia's like, you can't let this weird man with a gun in the car. And I think once he gets in the U-Haul and starts talking to the family, it felt a little like they could have taken another pass at that dialogue. But I'm just trying to find something that I like. That's probably the one thing that stuck out to me that I didn't really like.
There's a line there too where Julia Garner says something like, we're tough people. And he turns around and says, you don't look tough to me. And he says, but I mean that as a compliment. It looks like you've been kept safe and you look healthy.
And then he does say, like, I'm sure you're so proud to Blake that you have such a beautiful, smart family. And then everything picks back up again because then they get into an accident as Blake is driving. I did think it's funny that when they get to Derek, it's daylight. And then we cut to it being nighttime. Like, how far and long were they driving? But Blake is driving and it's nighttime now. Mm-hmm. And he's kind of not paying attention to the road and almost hits something, which is probably the werewolf. And so he veers off the road and crashes the U-Haul. And now it's like dangling off of a cliff or something. And that's when he gets attacked. But I thought all of that was very well done.
Yeah, the pacing is quite slick.
Yeah.
But then you really are just kind of stuck at this farmhouse while this man... my note about this was, it feels like Little House on the Overlook Prairie.
Oh, wow. And I wrote down, this is the longest, shittiest night ever. But as we see Blake start to transition, I thought that was very well done. The effects are very well done. I did get teary-eyed because now Blake is starting to lose the ability to speak, mm-hmm. but the daughter is still recognizing him as her dad and like trying to, like, she's very concerned for him. And because we also understand that Julia and Christopher, their marriage, he confronts her right before they leave for the trip, asking if she's happy, because it doesn't feel like they're happy. And he doesn't think that they should continue to live like this. So, that's kind of a common trope in horror films that like a fractured relationship is brought together.
But we only get one scene of them being slightly snippy with one another because she comes home and she's on an important call with her editor while he's making dinner. He's like, can you take that in the other room? And she continues the conversation. It's like, I feel like we could have used just a little bit more finesse with them as a couple.
I don't disagree with you, but I also can relate to there being sort of this low-grade chronic sort of tension that isn't like we don't love each other and we're not like miserable. Mm-hmm. But it's like, I almost took it as like they have a nice life and things are okay, but there's something not quite right. And that's when he says, well, I think maybe it's a good idea if as a family we go back to Oregon. Mm-hmm. But at a point, Julia Garner's trying to determine what's wrong with him because he can't speak. So she hands him pen and paper. And I got teary-eyed when he scribbled that he was dying. Mm-hmm. Again, I have been drinking. I don't know.
She's like, oh, no, you're going to be fine. Again, they should have taken a family vacation. This is the trouble with going back. You can't go home again. The past will sink you. Go forward.
But then after he writes down he's dying, she notices that he's bleeding. So she checks his wound, which, earlier didn't look so bad.
She had dressed. Yeah.
She had dressed it in bandages.
With hydrogen peroxide.
But then now it looks worse. And then the daughter's alarmed. So she shoos the daughter off. And then we see Christopher Abbott start to scratch at the wound, and then he starts eating it, like biting at it. That was alarming.
It was alarming.
It was very effective.
Because he also is aware, it's kind of Islander Dr. Moreau, like, I'm aware that I'm a man, but I'm a beast, and I shouldn't do this.
Then this scene's in the trailer, but, Julia, along with Christopher and the daughter, escape the house to try to get to the truck, like the dead dad's truck, to start it to leave. And that was very tense because we see her trying to start she's trying to jump it with a battery pack. And you already know how it's going to go.
She's very resourceful.
She is.
Like the first time I had to change a battery in college on my Mazda, it took me 2 hours. Like she did that.
She knows exactly.
Very quickly and handles a shotgun very proficiently.
And then, of course, the wolf catches up with them. Christopher Abbott is still aware enough to try to protect his family, which he does. They get into a confrontation, and that's when Christopher Abbott kills the other wolf. That's when we learn it's his dad. You had clocked it. I wasn't clued in until we see the werewolf tattoo that we had seen 30 years prior.
But it also seems very fitting for all of the other elements going on, that it would be it would be dad.
So now that Christopher Abbott is sort of really transitioned and is more dangerous, Julia and the daughter try to escape into the barn, and Christopher gets caught in like one of those bear traps. Mm-hmm. And this fool chews his own foot off. That was shocking to me.
Hey, I mean, James Franco did it in 127 hours, didn't he?
But as I already mentioned, in the end, with the sort of, it's the daughter who tells the mother, like, basically put dad out of his misery. But my final thought was, as the mother and daughter are walking away, knowing that, because earlier in the film, Julia Garner said, like, basically she's concerned and maybe jealous that the daughter's more connected to the father. Mm-hmm. So all I could think of is, after this traumatic night, what's their relationship going to be like?
They're going to trauma bond.
They're going to trauma bond.
As one does. But I think both mother and father, they both share behaviors and attitudes where he says it, but Julia Garner, I think, reflects it too. Is like, I don't want to be like this. And, maybe the overall message is you don't have to be.
Well, I really like this director's interpretation of the Invisible Man. Mm-hmm. I like the Wolfman. I hope this director continues doing Dracula and Frankenstein and everything.
I think you need to watch Upgrade now, especially now that Waymo is a thing.
Oh.
Because I think Upgrade's a lot of fun.
What would you give Wolfman?
3.5. This is a January release, keep in mind. Kind of impressive.
Well, we're off to a good start because we also liked The Damned. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I thought this film was very good. I would give it 3.5 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.